Hello, Eastview Scholars, and we are here today to talk about water. It is, in the biology world, this is the important thing. Water is the molecule that supports all life. It is the solvent of life. When we talk about carbon, we'll talk about that as the duct tape of life. But at this point, we're talking about water, and that's because all living organisms need water. Most cells are surrounded by water, and the abundance of water on Earth makes it habitable. And we're going to talk about that and its emergent properties and what makes it that and why NASA is spending their time searching for water as opposed to organisms on other planets. Anyhow, let's talk about water itself. If you remember, water is polar covalent. There's the picture. The oxygen is much more electronegative, drawing the hydrogen atom electron towards it, creating a dipole moment, as we can see. And then with those dipole moments, then you can have what's called hydrogen bonding, if you remember from chemistry. And that's a weak but effective bond that allows water to have the amazing properties as it does. And this is what we're talking about here. They don't last very long, but they break, reform, break, reform, break, reform, and they create what are called emergent properties. Now, water's not the only thing with the emergent properties. Emergent properties are essentially what they say they are. If you take the separate components, they don't have the ability to have those properties. In class, we talk about a bicycle. You can get a bicycle shipped to you in a box that is all apart. It's a bicycle, but you can't ride it like a bicycle. In and of itself, it doesn't have the properties of a bicycle. It just has the parts. When you put it all together, then you can ride the bike. Emergent properties for any level of organization is that you are able to take whatever puts you together. In this case, the hydrogen and oxygen. The properties of hydrogen and oxygen do not lead to what we're looking at here with the ability to moderate temperature and stuff as emergent properties of water. But that polarity and the polar bonding and the hydrogen bonding then leads to these emergent properties, which the hydrogen and oxygen don't have by themselves. And here you see them in that ability to moderate temperature, the expansion, the cohesive behavior, and then what you know from chemistry, its versatility as a solvent, gives it those properties that really allow life to survive on our planet. Okay, and here we're looking at the cohesive properties. You can look at trees, but think of any plant. You know, big trees give us that a better understanding. But as we'll talk about soon, plants have vessels. They have water conducting cells and food conducting cells, and these are like vessels that run from the roots up to the trees. Because of the cohesive properties of the water molecules themselves are hydrogen bonded. So what's happening is a process of transpiration. Water evaporates from the leaves. It leaves the leaves. That creates a potential difference which starts drawing water up. Because of the hydrogen bonding that holds them together here, that pulls the molecules up. Now, you're thinking redwoods are really tall. What is also helping on the walls of these vessels is what's called adhesion. The same thing, that you have those attractions because of the dipole to the sides of the vessel that also help it pull up. Okay? And that's what we're talking about, cohesion and adhesion. In plants alone, you can see the value of getting the water up to the leaves so the leaves can do their photosynthesis. Okay. It also creates surface tension. If you remember seeing the meniscus forming with liquids, or we have a picture here of a water strider in its environment able to scurry across the top of the water. That surface tension, because of the hydrogen bonding that doesn't allow the surface to break, gives it those properties. And so that's cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension. Those are very important properties of water that allow different ecosystems to operate as they do and water to operate as it does. And that's one of our emergent properties. Water, if you remember also from chemistry, has a very high specific heat. one of the most energy absorbing substances that we know. And so it not only has great chemical properties, but here's really what it does. It minimizes temperature fluctuations, not only in living organisms, but on our Earth. Here, I'll show you a picture here. And you can see of the Pacific coast and the California coast there. And you can see the average temperature on the coast, because it's right next to the Pacific Ocean, really stays fairly moderate. I mean, yes, it does get high at times and everything, but this is really fairly moderate. Excuse me, the picture kind of looks like it fell apart. Sorry. Something in the transfer of the picture has all the stuff off. But the point is, when you get towards the desert, you see greater ranges in temperature than you do near the ocean. And if you think of how much of our planet is cooled, it does keep our planet in a range that supports all the chemical properties and the metabolism and the reactions, and for the macromolecules holding together the proteins so they don't denature. Our Earth has a very moderate, and if we got rid of that, you know, along with getting rid of the atmosphere, our temperature changes from night to day would be unable to support life. There's also evaporative cooling for plants and living organisms. Think of when you sweat. When you sweat, you feel cooler because you're drawing off, that energy is being drawn off as you sweat, and as those gas molecules leave, the water molecules below have a lower kinetic energy. And so that's going to make you feel cooler. So that's, and you sweat and stuff to keep your body in a very narrow temperature range. Okay. One of the other emergent properties is the ability, the increase in density for water from liquid to solid, which allows water to float on top, or ice to float on top of water. If it didn't have that expansion property, which is because of the hydrogen bonding and the tension of the molecules, then eventually the ice would sink and the lakes would freeze over, and there would be no way to have life on Earth, because we are, a lot of our food supply in our ecosystem is based on the fact that the water underneath doesn't freeze, and the plants and the animals in the ocean and our bodies of water stay alive. So that ice lays on the top. It also provides an insulating layer, but then it never fully freezes down below, keeping some liquid water to sustain life. Right? And there's the example right there. You can see the hydrogen bonding, which in a sense you think of, kind of one way to think about why does it expand is it traps air. Okay. And then finally, really, we know that water is the solvent of life. We're not going to have another chemistry class here, but you know that most living organisms are solutions. We are solutions. We break down foods and use those and metabolize our food to create energy and to reform proteins and carbs and macromolecules and reform cells and stuff. And if you recall from your chemistry, water is the universal solvent because it's polar, and most substances in the world are polar, except for carbon-hydrogen bonds and diatomic bonds, which we'll talk about with carbon. It gives you that ability to separate the organic macromolecules, so you have that separation from inside and outside the cell, inside the organism, outside the organism. But if you think back, it allows you to dissolve ionic substances, which brings you a lot of your nutrients and minerals, and allows those interactions to occur. If you think back to your chemistry, most of the chemistry that you did was with solutions, because that breaks the ions apart in ionic reactions, and then allows for all sorts of things that we'll see later on as far as energy production and nervous system actions and muscular system actions that allow organisms to survive. Anyhow, the big key to water is understanding and the relationship between water structure and its emergent properties. And you should be able to apply those to situations that allow living organisms to survive, and why water is so important. Until then, keep working on review sheets, keep watching videos, and scholar up, Eastview.